Good morning. Continuing our journey in Samach Vav through the lens of the Frierdiker Rebbe's maamarim, the two maamarim from 1931, Tafel Sadik Aleph, Yechayenu Miyamayim, which we covered, and now we're in the second Mah Yofis. We are on page the bottom of page 251. The Seif Maamarim Tafel Sadik Aleph, which corresponds to Samach Vav, basically page 19. Page 19. Yeah. So what we're learning is what we learned already in Samach Vav, but now it's with the Frierdiker Rebbe's additions and explanations. And a review is always good, but there's more than just a review. We're getting many more details. So we're talking about the many elevations through the levels we call of divine consciousness or divine pleasure, that's called Gan Eden. And it's important because Gan Eden, when you say the word Gan Eden, everybody conjures up all kinds of preconceived notions. That's why it's important to define it as really a ladder. Well, more than a ladder, because it's not commensurate levels necessarily. It also includes commensurate levels, but it's really an infinite amount of levels, Ad Ein Sof, because ultimately it's a revelation and a reflection, as we discussed, and an expression of the divine Ein Sof, of Tainug Atzmi, which is essential pleasure, at the core. So there are all these levels, which really can define, like this, you could think of it like the barometer that defines the level of a soul's experience of reality, experience of godliness, of the divine. Now the levels are, because they are including to be things that are not commensurate to one another, as we discussed, because in the Hishtomimus, it's like rungs, one link is linked to the next link in the chain. One hasaga, one comprehension leads you to the next. But when you're dealing with levels that are infinitely apart, or paradigm shifts, as he explains on page 251, that what he called sichlim shehem, that are not sichlim beishtalshus, but he called sichlim, the Frierdiker Rebbe called it sichlim beinanim regilim. Just looking for the exact expression, sichlim beinanim regilim, which means average and more routine. But we talk about sichlim amukim. Here you need a bittul of the previous comprehension in a much more intense way. In general, all knowledge requires bittul, because if you're not empty, if you're not receiving, you're not going to grow and you're not going to understand things. You're not going to learn anything. But when it comes especially to levels that are qualitative shifts, whether paradigm shifts or quantum leaps, however you want to define it, that requires a bittul, like you said, like a divesting of, stripping of, suspending, all the different words we've used, of a lower level, in order to be able to absorb a higher level. And the classic example is Rab Zera, who forgot the methodology of Talmud Bavli in order to assume and absorb the methodology of Talmud Yerushalmi. Which was brought, I think, earlier. Well, Samach Vav for sure. The bottom of page 248, the previous maim. So now we're up to that point. So the last line, Sichlim Amukim, that when it gets to Lagia Laskola Yesra Amuka, to reach a deeper level of understanding of a concept, where they bittul hasaga kedemis, is through the bittul, the suspension of the previous hasaga, previous way of understanding it, in order to be able to adapt to and assimilate the higher way of understanding it. And now he continues. We are 3, 6, 8 lines from the bottom of page 251. The pages, if you want to follow them, can be found on our WhatsApp Samach Vav group. And I'll continue from that line that begins La Skola Yesra Muka, And he says, the Zeu Inyan Hishtomimus. So now he takes us back to the language in Samach Vav. In Samach Vav, on page 19, closest to the top, he says, Zeu Inyan, that Ubesechel Omukes et Tzarech Leis Inyan Hishtomimus. So the Frierdiker Rebbe elaborated a bit by comparing a Seichel Amuk to a Seichel Beinani, an average level of understanding to a deep understanding. The Rebbe Rashab didn't mention Seichel Beinani, but as we've seen a few times, the Frierdiker Rebbe contrasts things. Just like with the Einig, he gave us different levels of pleasure in order to understand Einig Pashut, the pleasure of children, if you remember the Nachas, the pleasure from Shabbos, and then he came to explain the pleasure of Chayas, of vitality and the life force. So the same thing here, to understand Seichel Amuk, the Frierdiker Rebbe added contrast. So Seichel Amuk, says the Rebbe Rashab, and the Frierdiker Rebbe now cites from there, is it called Hishtomimus. In the footnotes, you'll see 69, I see 70, 71, you'll see the sources for it if you want to look it up more in detail. I know on the WhatsApp group was posted a chat, an AI explanation of Hishtomimus. I'll explain it, but keep in mind we did learn it more at length in Samach Vav, so I'm going to keep my explanation pretty brief, relying on, if you want more information, either go back to those classes on page 19 in Samach Vav. They're all posted now on our YouTube channel. You can always go back to look at that. So what's Hishtomimus? So the word Hishtomimus itself can be translated utter silence. It could be translated amazement, awe. It's like when someone is completely overwhelmed and silenced by something. Like he says, Ukamaimer ishtemim kisho chada. So again, the Rebbe Rashab, all taken from the Rebbe Rashab. Want to see 81? Yeah. So ishtemim kisho, which is from the book of Daniel, that he was, for that moment, he was like frozen, silenced. So what do you see from that? In a regular seichel, you don't necessarily see that. When you're learning something, it's not every moment you learn something new that you get completely silenced or completely lost, so to speak, in the process. But when it comes to seichel amuk, something that really is completely very profound, that is called Hishtomimus chada, shehu inyan habittul masagos harishena. This refers to this bittul that we're talking about, that whatever you've learned suddenly becomes like as if you don't know anything. It's like feeling like, sometimes you learn something, you understand something, and then you learn a deeper explanation, or you learn it with a teacher that explains it in a whole new way. You suddenly feel completely ignorant. But the fact is you do know, you did learn it. Why? Because we're not talking about a commensurate level. If you just get a deeper perspective that's not completely disproportionate to what you understand, so great, you actually feel a certain satisfaction. You learn something, now you understand it better. But when someone presents something that's like a whole new take on it, on something that you know, your saga becomes bittul. It's like, I don't even begin to understand it. And that's the bittul that's required to be able to elevate and absorb that higher state of understanding, that higher understanding. So it's a bittul masagos harishena. The b'shas Hishtomimus lo yesh klal gili seichel. At the moment of Hishtomimus, when a person is in that like state where they completely lost themselves, you can't call that asagas haseichel. They're not like understanding it a little or not so much. They're completely right now not in a state of asaga, like lost. They're lost in it, literally. At that time, there's no revelatory seichel and understanding in his mind. You're not in that state. You're in a state of awe, if you wish, or wonder. And because you lost that previous hasaga, that's what makes you a keli. That's what allows you to come to that deeper perspective, this whole new perspective. And again, the best way to understand is to find an example in your own life where you've experienced it. Sichlim that we understand, one seichel leads to the next, That's more commensurate to one another, what he called Hishtomimus. But now we're talking about a seichel that is shalei be'erech, disproportionate, and far a qualitative shift or paradigm shift from where you are, and that requires this level of bittul. Okay, let me just see Samach Vav. Let me see this. Yeah, this is exactly word for word from Samach Vav. What's interesting is in Samach Vav he follows this with an example of the deterioration and the erosion of a seed in the ground. He goes right away, Rukvin Hagadin Ba'aretz. The Frierdiker Rebbe doesn't bring that mashal, at least not here. If I recall, he may not even bring it all together. Maybe later. I'm not sure. We'll see. But he definitely doesn't bring it here, which one could discuss why. Seemingly, the Rebbe Rashab brings it, so it's an appropriate example, obviously, and that's what actually happens. The seed doesn't turn into a sapling or something that grows. It has to deteriorate. It erodes, and you could actually see it. You know, if you ever see something grow, you could see the seed when it begins to lose its identity, it loses its substance. You could even see a seed that is halfway deteriorated and already something is sprouting from it. If you ever looked at a flower plant or any other thing that's sprouting. So seemingly, it's a physical example, obviously. It's not a seichel example. But the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab does bring it. The Frierdiker Rebbe does not. And that can be discussed why, but that's the point. Maybe he brings it later. So I don't want to completely negate. It could be because he's going to add now, the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to add now explanation in this idea that we've been learning. So the next lines are Frierdiker Rebbe's language and explanation. But let me stop. So far what we read is straight from Samach Vav, but I'll stop anyway if someone wants to ask anything. Okay. So now the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to dissect this further in his classic and inimitable style. And he says like this, the Bechlolus, again, this is Frierdiker Rebbe's addition. This is one of the reasons we're learning this. This is how he adds to the whole idea. He says the Bechlolus in general, in general, comprehending and understanding an idea comes dafka through yigiyah, through effort, through exertion. So obviously a good mind can grasp an idea quickly. But if you really want to understand something, he says asag, he's not just talking about grasping, really understand something, it's ayidei yigiyah dafka. Like we learned earlier, and he's going to soon dissect the maamar Chazal, yagaita matzasa. Yagaita matzasa, timing. Someone says, I made effort, and I found, and it yielded results. That's the way it is. If someone says, lo yagaita matzasa, I'll time it. Or someone says, yagaita v'lo matzasa, also I'll time it. Yagaita matzasa. So yigiyah is a prerequisite in any form of growth. Anything that's worth talking about, that you produce, comes after some form of yigiyah. He's talking here now about hasaga b'seichel. Comes through yigiyah. The geder haseichel mugder b'shnei tzavos. And this is right away, as soon as you see this language, those familiar with the Frierdiker Rebbe style, this is the Frierdiker Rebbe. I pointed it out a few times. He breaks things down very almost scientifically and into levels. So the Rebbe Rashab just speaking general terms. The Frierdiker Rebbe takes it even to, as I said, fleshes it out more. She says that Geder HaSeichel, the very category of Seichel, he's analyzing now what is intelligence. It's Mugder B'Shnei Tzavos. It's defined by two extremes. Shnei Tzavos really means two edges or two bookends. The Shnei Tzavos. Shalei B'Nakel, that it doesn't come easily, U'B'Yegiyah Dafka, and it comes Dafka with exertion. Now, why he calls that Tzavos? It doesn't sound like they're opposites, for sure not. But not coming easy and effort sound quite similar. But he's going to explain. It's two steps. Because something could be not easy, but it doesn't require tremendous exertion. It requires some effort. But we'll see how he explains it. But he says, Shalei B'Nakel, that it doesn't come easily. From the word kal will be yagia dafka. And it comes dafka with effort, exertion. Strain even, you can use the word. In Yiddish, he says, nid gring, means not easy. Gring in Yiddish is light, is nakel, not easy. Umitharavanya. If you know Yiddish, you can see it has a certain an extra emphasis. As you see in the maamar, they use Yiddish whenever there's a certain extra, they want to underscore or emphasize something. So, nit, gring, umitharavanya. So basically, translation of leiber nakel will be a gia dafka. Haravanya, especially in Yiddish, is a very strong word. It means like struggling with it. But it's yigia basically. The Zeu Sha'amr Razal, this is what Razal, our sages say. Megillah Davov Amid Beis, actually brings the Gemara. Im yemelach ba'odam yagaiti v'lei matzasi. If a person tells you, I exerted myself, I invested and made effort, v'lei matzasi, and it didn't yield, I didn't find what I was looking for, Al taimin, do not believe him. It's not accurate. If he says, lo yagaiti, umatzasi, the other way around. I didn't make effort, but I got my results. Also, lo taimin. Also, don't accept that. Don't believe that. Yagaiti matzasi taimin. Yagaiti, person who says, I made effort, matzasi, and it yielded results. Then you say taimin. The Rebbe, just for the record, often emphasizes that he doesn't say that it's not correct. He says al taimin. Even in amunah, even with faith, you can't accept such a concept. That's how ridiculous, or that's how it doesn't make. It's not. In other words, it's not just doesn't make sense. Even with amunah, could someone say, you know what? Maybe with amunah you could achieve something without effort, or you don't achieve something if with effort. Even amunah doesn't accept that. Okay, just as an aside. So he explains, the liyah shagdara sasechel shelo yove benakel, being as we just said, that the hagdara, the parameters, you can say the parameters, the very definitions of seichel, is that it comes not easily. And now again in Yiddish, he adds in the parentheses another Yiddish expression, Gring kemen kein seichel nit verstehen. Easily, no seichel can be understood. It's even stronger than what he said till now. Gring kemen kein seichel nit verstehen. Somebody feels they're just going to easily understand something, it's not correct. The easy approach, no seichel can be understood with an easy approach. Now you'll say, what about what I said before? We said understanding. We're not talking about grasp something quickly, but he really internalized it, really understood it in a way you can explain it to others. No, it does not come easy. Lezeis, that's why the Razal say, ha'emer lo yagaitu matzosi al time. That's why if a person says lo yagaitu, I didn't make the effort, meaning I did it easily, and says I got results, al time, you don't accept that. Next page, 252. Reishon and Beis. Da sogas sasech lo idei yagia dafke. Because Asar Seichel is dafka through Yigiyah. V'ageder Hasheni, and now he's adding the second geder is the word effort, even though he just used it in the first ingredient of Seichel. We'll see how he distinguishes. The second geder, which before he called exertion, not just not easy, but effort, hu shal yidei Yigiyah b'meskolis masigi meisam. The Geder Sheni is that through Yigiyah, through the effort, b'muskolis, in different ideas, you comprehend them. I think I know what he wants to say here. I'll explain in a moment. And that's why comes the second phrase. He's explaining the two phrases. Why do you have to say both? Once you say lo yagaiti umatzasi, why do you have to say yagaiti v'lo matzasi? Because he wants to explain that you need two things. One, that it's not easy, and the second is you need Yigiyah. That's why a person who says, I have Yigiyah and I did not discover, I did not find what I was looking for, Al timing the hasogas hasechol ayidei yigia dafke. So it's a subtle difference if you really think about it, because either way it means you need to put effort. But Frierdiker Rebbe is breaking it down between not being easy and the effort that you put into it. And he's not saying it's synonymous. He's saying it's two gedarim. He calls it two tzavas before, two edges, 2 points. But let me finish and let's see if we can explain it further. And that's why the one who says, I've made effort, and yes, the effort has yielded results, timing. Now, why is this the case? Because like we said, when you want to climb to a higher level, the understanding that you had before is not sufficient. What does the Yagiyah do? If you recall, he said it's like exercising your mind by being bittul v'zichur klei meiche. It's emptying in a way and cleansing and refining the clay of your moyach, just like any exercise. And that's why through this bittul, he becomes a keli, a container to receive the seichel, the deeper seichel. Well, he doesn't say deeper, just the seichel. You need bittul. I was going back to the seichel amuka. The same thing. In order to reach a much deeper level of understanding, so the bittul of klei seichel. So seichel in general needs yigiyah. Even if you're not doing a paradigm shift, you need your guide to mitzosa. That's what he says. But when you talk about a deep seichel where you need a real leap, obviously the bittul is even more critical. The zeu inyan ha'hishtomimus, and now he's concluding his explanation of the Hishtomimus that the Rebbe Rashab introduced. That's Hishtomimus, to be Hishtomimus zu dafke nasa kli lekabala seichel amuk b'yeser. Because this Hishtomimus, this being, you can say frozen, or this being completely lost in the process, is what turns him into a keli to receive a much deeper concept or a deeper understanding of a concept. So if it just said in the maamar Chazal, lo yegaita mitzasi, you would know the first point. That seichel kup nish gering, like he said. Gering kann seichel nit verstehen. Why? Because seichel needs to have, doesn't come easy. So someone that says, it did come easy, by saying, lo yegaita, I didn't make effort, and I got results, that's not correct. Then comes the second point. The point, not the negating the easy, but that you need to actually make effort. So again, it's somewhat, you could say, subtle difference, but one is emphasizing more that easy doesn't work, and second, effort works. That's the second. That's someone who says, Yagaiti v'lei matzasi, that's incorrect. Because once you made effort, effort's going to yield results. So there is a difference between these two phrases. That's why Razal bring both. And the Frierdiker Rebbe puts it in one as being not easy, and the other is the emphasis on the effort. All in all, it leads to the same place, that we need that effort, and it can't come easy, that you need both elements. Because a person could say, okay, it doesn't come easy, but who says I'm going to put an effort in? So that comes the effort part. So you guide to matzasi. That's how it works. When there's yigiyah, there's matzasa, and that explains also the Hishtomimus. The yigiyah is a form of bittul, basically. That's what it does. Yigiyah, as he said, refines the mind. It's a form of bittul, because if you don't have to struggle, if you don't have to exert yourself, then you just continue where you were before. That's not bittul. Then you're just continuing the flow. Here we're talking about moving to another level, so you require this yigiyah that he associates with bittul. In Samach Vav, this is going to be critical, because he's going to talk about these two elements of yigiyah and bittul, which I'm thinking maybe why the Frierdiker Rebbe is elaborating, because those are two elements in Aveda b'koyach atzmi. The Aveda down below is the effort we put in, and the bittul that we need to do so, the Kabbalah sale, that those are the things that bring down Amshachas ha'atzmus into tachtenim, more than the giluyim themselves. But here, we're still talking in Gan Eden, remember. So even in the Giluyim revelations of Gan Eden, going from one level to the next requires bittul. But you could imagine how much more bittul is required when we come into this world, where there are no Giluyim, and we have to overcome all the challenges of the darkness of this world. But we'll talk about that later. Right now, talking about it in these levels of Gan Eden, and we finished the paragraph on page 252, and I'll stop if there are any questions. Okay. So now, continuing with the themes of Samach Vav, this first example that we learned about the bittul needed from one level to the next was Torah, and in general, Seichel and Chachma. You remember, Samach Vav now, on page 19, the new paragraph, he said, Kamoy Kain, hu ba'aliyas ha'nefesh b'tfilah. The Rebbe Rashab went on to say that you find the same thing in davening. You also find the need for bittul. Remember, aim din lispal el metech keved reish, hachna v'shiflus, that before a person davens, a person should not begin to stand to daven until they are in a state of keved reish, which really means a seriousness. The mind is heavy, but that means an accountability, a bittul basically, hachna v'shiflus, a type of subjugation and bittul before you start davening. So now the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to continue along that line and speak about tefillah now. As I said, corresponding to middle of page 19 in Samach Vav. So I'm looking at both of them as we learn it. We learned it already in Samach Vav. We're going to learn it here. And once we finish this maamar, we're going to obviously go back to Samach Vav, where we're up to the new maamar, Lulav Arava, which we'll be learning. Let me just see something. Yeah, good. So, continuing now. New paragraph on page 252. V'yuven zeh ba'aveda de tefillah. I will understand this idea of bittul from one level to the next in the aveda, in the service of davening. A little different language. As Samach Vav says, the language, as I just read, is kamoy kain hu ba'aliyas ha'nefesh b'tefillah. Shezeh dafka adem is v'shiflus. The language is a bit different. Doesn't change the understanding. It's just contextual, a little context difference. So he says, we'll understand this, how it is in the Aveda of davening. The bigdei ti aliyas nafshei, li'isachad ba'avaya. That during davening is, of course, the process of connecting to God. In order for his nefesh to elevate, to unite ba'havaya with Hashem, and in Hashem, hu dafka idei hagdomas hameriros v'ashiflus. Is dafka through the preparation or the introduction of meridus, of, I translate it sadness, but it means that you are humbled in a way. V'hashiflus, meridus v'shiflus, a type of introspection. You can say the seriousness, and shiflus bittul hakademis lazeh, that precedes davening. Ukiyadua, as it's known, the kol inyan atfila, the whole inyan of davening is what? Lemishu hu bal madrega. Here the Frierdiker Rebbe adds to someone who's a bal madrega, meaning they are on a level, they are on a esteemed level, which is interesting why he's adding that. I guess he's saying it because not everybody reaches this level in davening. Let's see how he goes with this. I don't want to speculate, but that's what he says. The mishu bal madrega, the bederach klal hari aveda de tefillah hu shas sleisa shas kirva. Because in general, the service of davening is what the Zohar calls shas sleisa davening. The time of davening is a time of battle.
Kravo.
What did I say? Krava is in Aramaic, is battle. Oh, it's not just in Aramaic, in Hebrew, like mikrovli. Padu shalom nashri, ki rabim hoyimodim mikrovli. So it's in battle. So tefillah is compared to a battle, to a war. As you see, this is brought in the name of the Zohar and Chassidus and so on. So, why? Why is it a war? Because it's the birur, v'zichel chamidus. Because the human emotions, the subjective human emotions, are driven by self-interest and have their interest is in their own needs. And the whole idea of davening is to refine your emotions, to direct them to godliness and to higher purpose, not just, like he says in Tanya, that the nefesh habamis resides in the left side of the heart. Why? Because the heart is an impulsive emotions. Nefesh halikis resides in the right side of the heart and in the mind. It's reflective. And during davening, the moyach, the contemplation in Hashem, controls and harnesses and directs the midas. So davening is a battle. It's a battle with your midas, basically. Like it says by Karbonis, a person who will offer. Yaakov also means to come close. For a person, that's what the whole idea is. Offerings are sacrifices. You're bringing a korban. What's a korban? You're giving up something. You're burning the fat and the blood, etc., and the mizbeach. The same applies to the nefesh habamis, the midas of the nefesh habamis. So what does the pasuk say? Adam ki yakim bekem korban laHashem. So the Chassidus explains why it should have said Adam ki yakriv mikem korban. I'm sorry, Adam mikem ki yakriv korban laHashem. When a person among you, but it says Adam ki yakriv mikem, because you're being makriv yourself. So he said, Adam yiskarav laHashem mikem korban lahavaya. That from you yourself becomes a korban to Hashem, to get closer to Hashem. Shu hakrava mikem. It's akrava from within, from you, from the person, from the people. The prati madregas hanefesh habamis shalei. So it's not just a person is bringing a behemoth as a korban. He is bringing himself. He is being makriv and bringing himself closer. What part of himself? The nefesh habamis. The detailed levels of the nefesh habamis, which are the midas of the nefesh habamis, the emotional nefesh habamis. This is a battle. You're taking something that is driven by its own interests, and you're now compelling it to become closer to godliness. So that's what general davening is. But now he's explaining what he means by a Baal Madrega. This is all people, this is all davening. Avol mishu Baal Madrega, but someone who's a Baal Madrega usually means someone who's of esteemed quality, someone who's a higher level. A Baal Madrega means he's not just a regular avodah, it's a Baal Madrega. Hari avoidose betfilu b'chinas kirvas Hashem l'hayir nafshe be'er eliki. His davening, his service in davening goes further than that. It's not just bringing the korban of his animal soul, it's kirvas Hashem to radiate, closeness of Hashem to illuminate be'er eliki. In a way, you could say the first aspect of davening that he just spoke is more like sur merah. You're taking the emotions of the animal soul and you're offering them, and you're directing them to God. You're sacrificing them in a way. Obviously, you're harnessing them. You're not destroying them, but it's more of a battle with your midas. Here he's saying by Baal Madrega, there's an additional element. Well, additional. He's just saying. I'm not saying additional. Let me correct myself. That it's about getting closer to the area of the key. Should be radiating the key. So he's adding that. Now, when you look at the Samach Vav, it doesn't make this distinction. But now when you read it here, you can understand Samach Vav better. Because if you remember, in Samach Vav, he did speak about two aspects of davening. One is get closer to Hashem, and one is contemplating on the distance that we experience. And that creates a longing and a yearning. And he did speak about those two aspects, if you recall, page 19 and 20. So I believe the Frierdiker Rebbe is explaining it now by explaining that there are two different types of people. Let's call it the average person who davens. Yes, his avodah is to offer and take his emotions and direct them to godliness. The Baal Madrega has the ability to do a lot more than that, to bring godliness and radiate within him. Now, the most likely reason for that is because he's already done the Bir Hamidus, or it's easier for him, because remember, Baal Madregi doesn't say it's tzaddik, and that's a Beinani. In Tanya, that's the difference between a tzaddik and a Beinani in a way. A Beinani, by davening, he's struggling, but he's able to control his nefesh habamis. A tzaddik doesn't have a nefesh habamis. So I don't want to say that is the Baal Madrega versus the regular. Could be he's hinting to that, but he's not using the word, and he's not referring to Tanya, so I'm being careful not to equate it with that. But it does, obviously, it brings it to mind as soon as you think about it. But right now, it's suffice it to say, one is a battle with the middays of the nefesh habamis, and one's focus is more on bringing godliness into the soul. I just want to see something here. Yeah. The reason he said so, because the Rebbe Rashab just says, Kirvas Havai L'Hoyer Nafshi Be'er Eliki. He doesn't talk about the middas of the nefesh habamis. He only talks about the second thing. So the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe is spelling it out. It could also be the Frierdiker Rebbe wants to spell it out very often. He broadened a topic for wider audiences. Now the Rebbe Rashab, you could say, is speaking a little to higher level people. The Frierdiker Rebbe is talking to everybody, even though obviously Samach Vav is also for everybody. But the emphasis is more Kirvas Havaya. That's just what, comes to mind as I'm reading it. But I want to continue reading because I don't want to come to any definitive conclusions until we finish the topic. Okay, so that's what he began with now. We didn't talk yet about the bittul. He just said there's bittul that prepares us for davening. But the first thing he wanted to establish, what is davening? So again, he says, Kol inyan tefillah l'mishu bal madrega is kirvas havai, getting closer to God, bringing godliness into his life. But derech klal, hariyavei tefillish is also a battle with the midas of nefesh habamis. So you have two elements here, two levels, if you wish. Now he's going to continue to explain what these levels are. But if anybody wants to ask anything, I'm happy to take any questions. But like I said, we're in the middle of it, so it's not like it hasn't fully developed it yet. And this process of bringing godliness, kirvas havaya, bringing and feeling close to godliness, which is the inyan of davening, like an intimate communication, an intimate connection, I should say, with Hashem. He says it's bebeze fanim. There are two ways to do this. Either liyez bebchinas kiruv v'dveikus belakus. One is that he should become in a state of kiruv, feeling closeness and attachment to godliness. So think of it, when you love someone, one way to connect is by acting on it, by bringing it alive, like fanning, so to speak, the flames of love and connection. That's one way. Another way, lahaliv nafshe bebchinas hislavus b'dish be'esh, to ignite his soul with a with a passionate fire. That he's igniting the tshuka, the yearning, and the thirst. So if you think about it, it's the other direction. One is by actually engaging in a loving connection, in what he calls dveikus, kiruv and dveikus. And the other is awakening a deep longing and thirst. Now, both of them are a relationship with Hashem, but it's a very two different approaches. In Samach Vav, we learned this relatively at length. I believe it was on the next page, page 20, was more details, but the Frierdiker Rebbe is organizing it differently. He's establishing it right at the outset, which makes it somewhat easier to structure. I'm just looking here. Yeah. He doesn't speak right away. The Rebbe Rashab doesn't get to these two efanim till I believe the next page, 20. the Frierdiker Rebbe right away is laying it out. So two things the Frierdiker Rebbe has added so far. One is the difference between a Baal Madrega and an average person. Doesn't call it an average person. I'm just using that to define it. And now, talking about the two Eifanim. Now, the two Eifanim, do they correspond to these two types of people? I'm not sure. Because you could say the first one is more for the Kirvas Hashem, the Baal Madrega, who's working on getting closer to godliness. The first one he spoke about is a battle with Midas of Nefesh Habamis. So it sounds that that's more of like the Surmara, like you could say more developing a thirst and a passion and a longing. But I'm not sure that's correct. I'm just saying again what comes to mind when you read it. So let's be patient and let's see how he develops it. But okay, so those two ways. I was going to explain it. The first oifen, the first manner, which is kiruv and dveikus. Again, just keep that in mind. Kiruv and dveikus is first oifen. Simoyin, chukav and simoyin is the second. So when you talk about kiruv and dveikus, closeness and attachment, the closeness and intimacy with the godliness that a person is experiencing during davening, belakus, akiruv and dveikus belakus, k'sha'er meir b'gili b'nafshe. It's when the light, the revelation, is radiating in a revealed way in his nefesh, and he feels godliness. He feels something divine, something transcendent. And how do you arrive to that level? That's through a comprehension and a contemplation. A sog of izbanus, shem izbainin belakus, that he's contemplating on godliness. Biskashus v'amokas hadas, in a very focused. Skashus also means to be connected, but I think it's focused and amokas hadas and real concentration. Leida sa'in elaki, to know the divine concept that he's contemplating on, whatever it may be. Could be the perpetual creation of existence. It could be the levels whether God is like an artist or beyond being an artist. I mean, I'm just throwing out different examples of what you could be contemplating on. Or it could be an Atzilus Abriya or a Chesed and Gvura. I mean, there's so many different things that one can contemplate on. So by that contemplation, so he's concentrating and focusing on what, how, and what is it that level is about, that divine concept that he's contemplating on. When a person understands an intellectual concept, a cognitive, a rational concept, and comprehends it. So maven means understand, and masiga comprehends. That seichel becomes etched, mitztayers from the word siyur, like it's shaped. It's you get like an etch, a visual. Doesn't say the word visual, but mitztayer means it gets etched in the mind. Well, mistakel boy, here he has say mistakel is he gazes at it. Keilu mabit betmunas odom, as if he's gazing at the image of a person. Hamakubitz mevarim, that is made up of different limbs and organs. I believe this is all the Frierdiker Rebbe's addition. Just looking quickly, he does talk about mokas hadas, but he doesn't speak about it so in such detail. Mahu. Here he just says me'er e'er begili nafshe. Frierdiker Rebbe is adding this element. Basically, what he's saying is that understanding something changes you. Your mind now is envisioning as if you're seeing an image of godliness. Obviously, it's not a physical image, but he's using that as an example of how much it takes over your mind when you really contemplate on something. So imagine visually, I'll just give an example. Imagine visualizing the energy within your neshama. So you don't see a soul, but you can contemplate on it. You know, what is the soul like? Remember, the soul is a divine soul. So that's why I'm using that example. What is the soul like? I'm not talking about a superficial or casual or surface level contemplation. You're really focusing. You know, you start asking yourself, what would the body be without a soul? it would just be an empty keli. So what is the soul like? Besides energizing you, the soul has entire personality. So all that is a concentration. The more you concentrate on it, the more you focus on it, your mind begins to envision what it feels like. Yeah, you could say it compares to electricity within an appliance, just as making it a little more palpable. So the point is that it's affecting the mind in that fashion. She's like a tziyur, like he calls mitztayer b'meich imistakel b'kilu ma b'tun sodma makubetz be'evorim. Now this again is classic Frierdiker Rebbe. This you find in many in a number of my maamar, this approach, where he brings it down almost like in a way like an artist. He gives very human examples of how a person contemplate on godliness. And he's going to continue. Why is he saying evorim here? Why is it important to say, fine, it's like envisioning something, but why is it important to say envisioning a human, like a piece of, like an artist creates a human being with evorim? So he said, why? So he says like this, because, to continue, ki hasvaris sichlim, because intelligent theories, intelligent ideas, svaris is a thought, an idea, a concept. Shebechol dvar haskola heim evorim. I don't think he means hasboris, he means hasvaris. Then every idea, so the different ways you explain it, he says, he's comparing that, they're like evorim. Like just like a human body has different limbs and organs, so every idea also has is so-called its limbs and organs that you hold, that like are handles. And what do? The kol svara he ever proti ma'askolahi. Every svara, every theory, meaning every aspect of the idea that you are contemplating on, is like an ever proti, is like another limb, another branch, if you wish, of that haskalah. Well, let's see where he's going with this. Like, why is the evorim so important? Asher mevin asher. First, I thought Asher mevin kulam. It could be Asher mebein kulam. Eila klolos hasechel.
Miben kulam.
Mebein kulam, right? That when you bring them all together. So let's say you're contemplating. I spoke about a neshama. So there's a lot of aspects to a neshama. What is a neshama? The different levels of a neshama, nefesh ruach, neshama chay, yechid, etc. So he says the sum total of all these svaras, even though each one is like one aver of a body, they all create one organism, one body. Shem mebein kulam, Hashem mebein kulam, eila klolos hasechel lahu. So the whole seichel is made up of a bunch of details, and when you bring all the details, it's more than the sum of the parts. They all come together. Kedugmas dvar atziyur, haba mishituv hakavim v'gavneihem. Just like an image of a piece of art that comes from a combination of lines and colors and hues. When you look at a piece of art, whether it's an art of an image of a person or any image, it's not just one color or one line. It's many different details that the artist put together and now creates one beautiful image. Let's say the image of a person. So basically he's saying the seichel, the overall seichel is like the body, is the whole idea. The details of each svara that brought you to that full understanding are like the different lines and details in a piece of art. Now, how this helps us, I'm not sure yet, but that's why we have to be patient to see where he's going with all of this. But all this is an addition of the Frierdiker Rebbe. None of this was said in Samach Vav. He's coming all to explain how his bonus during davening is what leads you to be close to God. Frierdiker Rebbe is explaining that now. Because his bonus so far, he said, creates this image in you. You're contemplating on the different details, and it creates an image just like details create an image of art. It's interesting using the example of art, which we have used quite a few times. So now he's continuing with this example. So now, just as in a person, what's the primary aspect of a human being? Not the limbs themselves or the organs. It's the koiches, is the faculties within the organs. So let's say again, you see the image of a person. He has eyes and ears. I'll use those evarim as an example. So is it the eyes and ears, or is it the power of vision in the eyes and the power of hearing in the ears? So obviously you need the body, you need the kalim, you need the limbs and the organs. But the ikar, but the ikar is, like he says, so just like by a person, they're the faculties that are found within the evarim, and the vitality. Means literally the energy of life, or the vitality of life. Like that hovers. Is like that. Is like that covers, that hovers. Al kulam yachdov, on all of them together. In other words, two things here. There's the faculties like sight or sound, or other faculties within all the evarim, and then there's a chayuni in general, a life force that encompasses and unites them all. Remember, the life force is not stronger in one part of the body than another. The fact that you're alive. And he's bringing that as well. So all this is part of the contemplation. You're contemplating on the evarim, the different svaris. That leads to a general idea. That's the seichel, is the whole picture of the adam. And now he's saying the ikar, and just like by in a person, the ikar is what's inside these evarim, meaning the faculties and the general life force. He'll call me out. So he says like, Oi, bitzir. Or how does it work in the muscle of the tzir, not of the human, in an image? When you're looking at a painting or a piece of art, even though that there are details, the main thing that you're going away with is what's the general image that the artist is conveying to you. You could obviously dissect it and analyze every detail, but overall, the most important thing is the closeness, the general message, you can say, the general message, the general spirit, if you wish, of what was painted, what was drawn. So all this is explaining what these bonus. Now he's going to go to the nimshal. Hine kamoi kain, just as it is, whether you talk about a human, the same thing with that tzir, that the main thing is the general energy within it, not the details. Hine kamoi kain. So even though the details brought you to there, but at the end of the day, it's the full human or the full picture that is most important. Hine kamoi kain hu ba'askala. The same thing is in an idea, in seichel. Because remember, he's comparing seichel with this example of evarim and an image. The la'achas shemevin es ha'inyan u'masige leprotov. After a person understands the idea and masige and comprehends it with leprotov in all its detail and its details, kedugmas ha'istaklos be'evarim o'bekarvei hatzir. Like looking at the evarim, the specific limbs and organs, or the kavi hatzir, the lines, the specific detailed lines in the image. That's the first step. That's the details. After that, hu ha'bote beklolos hanesa. So in other words, he's really giving us the anatomy of how the mind works. So first you gather many details, and then it all leads you to get the bigger picture. You can't get the bigger picture if you don't go through the details. The details are like the research or the analysis of every back and forth approach, every back and forth regarding this particular concept. But then comes the habota beklolos hanesa eichu mahu. So he's taking the words eichu mahu from Samach Vav, eich, how, and ma, and what, and really giving us what that means. So basically, it comes down to first many different details, like the Evarim on a person or the details on an image. And from that, you build a bigger picture. Now the pictures are all encompassing of the entire picture of the idea. Vitrog durch der Inyan bechluluse. Again, some Yiddish here. Vitrog durch der Inyan bechluluse. Hard to translate. Vitrog durch in Yiddish means how the idea is carried. But that's not really a good translation. Vitrog durch means what's the conclusion? More than that, like how the idea. I need to find the right words in English. In Yiddish, I understand it well. In other words, as long as you're still, let me explain it first and then I'll find the right expression. When you're still focused on the details, you can't really say what are the consequences and the implications of the overall idea because you're still building it. So let's say someone shows you a piece of art that's not finished. And you see many lines and details, but the artist didn't finish it. You can't say, I really know what he's painted here, because you see details. The same thing, you can see the details and not yet fully understand what is the big picture here. So vitrog durach means that you now have the whole picture, not just details. It's like almost a synergy of the whole picture, or even a human being. Someone will show you an image, but it's very vague or very blurred. I say, what is this? And you'll see an arm, a leg, and so on. So you can guess that it's a human, but you don't really see it clearly. At some point, you look clearly, you see, this is a human being. Yes, it's made up of parts, the arms and legs, a head, a heart, a body, a torso, etc., leg, and so on. So what the Vitrog Durich is like what he calls the Neisa Hakloli. The Neisa, what he calls, there we go, so it's like almost a summation and conclusion of the whole idea. And that's what we mean when we say the contemplation and the strong gaze. Staklus is like the strong gaze, I would say even more than gaze, the strong imagery or the strong picture, the strong visualization that resonates. The histaklus hi hamokas hadas. This is staklus. They are literally like envisioning it through the details. You're envisioning the whole picture. This is called hamokas hadas. What he said before, the concentrated das. Leider sa'inyan eliki eich umahu. He repeats again. To know the divine idea, eich, how and ma and what. How and what this is. And this is what causes and allows the elikus to radiate in his nefesh. So till now, in the Samach Vav, he just said it in general terms, and we left with us to figure out how that works. Frierdiker Rebbe is giving us talk about visualization, a visual expression of what this looks like. So basically, it comes down to this. A person uses their mind for many things throughout the day, whether it's for your business, whether it's for home, whether it's for whatever, learning something, etc. Davening is a very particular avodah. It's focusing on a relationship with Hashem. So the davening consists of contemplating on Hashem. Instead of focusing on, just like in business, you need to focus and understand a business plan or understand a problem and try to solve it. Davening is meant to be mind is now focused on understanding Hashem. But it's not just a general idea that I trust or believe in Hashem, is the details. You start thinking about how godliness plays itself out in your life. However one contemplates, like I gave the examples, Atzilus, Neshama. Now there are many details. The details lead you to a bigger picture. You get, now I'm really somewhat visualizing the godliness within me. That's called Gilei Elikus B'nafshe. Because you focused on it, you're concentrated, you went through a process of details, like you go through Psukkah de Zimra, talks about the different ways that God vivifies existence, talks about a lot of details. But what do you come away with? You come away with Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, by Shema. I'm just using that here. He doesn't use that example. But just so the details of thinking about God in a concentrated way lead you to a strong relationship that you can now say godliness is radiating in the person. So he says here, so Meir ha'er b'gilui b'nafshe. Okay, I'm going to stop here, because then he's going to talk about different levels. But here, this is a whole addition. This is a full explanation from the Frierdiker Rebbe that Samach Vav just said briefly, that it's Meir Gili Kirvis Hashem, being close to Hashem, but the Frierdiker Rebbe is like giving us a taste of what an Ovid does when they're davening, whenever they're davening, how they actually are having a divine experience. That's really what he's describing here. So it's quite unique. And but let me stop here for questions, and I'm going to stop the class at this point here. Begili Benafshi, close to the bottom of 252. Any questions? Okay. So now you know how to daven.
One thing I understood, maybe I bring additional stuff, but what you just said, from prat to klal, from analysis to synthesis, like our eye used to see first the details and then get the whole picture. And when you said if something is missing, our brain can even draw what part of puzzle was missing in order to have the full picture. It's a synthesis after analysis. Is that a correct perspective?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
I like that. Analysis and synthesis is a good way of expressing the details going into the picture. Yeah. Okay. Very good. And I see now he's going to go back to Samach Vav about Mamala Kalam and Sevav Kalam. There are different levels of what the contemplation is about. So he's going to give us some real going to give us more details on the contemplation itself. But this introduction is very fascinating, I believe. So let's stop here. It's 6 lines from the bottom of page 252, Reish Nun Beis. In the maamar Mah Yofis,